1960 was a year of many changes for the newly formed Francis Scalextric company, having only been released to the world in 1957 by B. Fred Francis. Scalextric was taking the world by storm with their new motorised system of fixed-track racing. Originally, Scalextric cars were clockwork Tinplate toys, and B. Fred Francis decided to electrify them by the addition of an electric motor and a gimbal wheel to pick up the electricity and thus be able to race. So the Lyons brothers had purchased Minimodels and thus Scalextric, and in 1960 Minimodels developed the injection molded plastic form of scale model in 1/32 scale, and the very first car was this, the Minimodels C54 Lotus 16, as raced by Graham Hill in 1959 Grand Prix. These two cars are extra special in that they're made in Australia. So we can see on the base alongside Francis Scalextric, and underneath the flag with Lotus there, it says made in Australia. Also noticeable are the copper loop braids. So it's very hard to find these cars with the copper loop braids still. It's a bit hard to read, but I can assure you that there it says made in Australia. Looking at the inside of these cars, the biggest giveaway that you're looking at an Australian car and the later made in Australia and New Zealand cars are the 6 body locating points that you'll see the female side of there in the body top. With the two made in Australia Francis Scalextric C54 cars, you will only find them in these two colours, the red and the British racing green. Now these early cars, they have a couple of little changes, especially from the British cars. With this guide retaining block here, most noticeable is the lack of a pimple on there. On the rubber guide retaining block. So it doesn't have a large pimple there. And the Australian cars, most often, from what I've known, they have this connector to the brushes from the wire, rather than the tubular connector that you will see on all English cars. The 1960 Scalextric C54 and the other three cars that were produced in 1960 are commonly referred to as Big Head or Loop Braid due to the shape of the braids with their distinctive loop, but technically they are referred to as G2 cars because that is the designation of this particular guide type, the G2 guide. And I will refer to them as G2 cars, but they are commonly known as Big Head and Loop Braid. Now these two, as I've previously said, they're very rare, having only been made for a very short time in 1960. They are marked Made in Australia. The next iteration, the body shells, are marked Made in Australia and New Zealand. And I believe, I have been told that there are Made in New Zealand cars that you can find. I've never seen them. They're something I'm definitely looking for and hoping to get. But these two are made in Australia. You'll only find them in these two colours. And if you actually are lucky enough to see a set box, it will be branded Cyclops. So I believe that Cyclops must have still had the naming rights, even though the cars are marked Scalextric. The very first of these 1960 G2 type cars came out in a Cyclops branded box, but the next box had Lines Brothers branding. So, and they have the Made in Australia and NZ body shells that the two countries would then share until the end of production of the Scalextric C54 Lotus 16, which was in 1968, with the G3 guide type that was introduced in 1961. And we'll get to those eventually, but at the moment we're just looking at the G2 guide type 1960 Scalextric C54 Lotus 16.